What's up guys, Sean here, and today we are finally, and I do mean finally, gonna talk about the Green New Deal, and I am so excited to do it. Earlier this year, everyone's favorite Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, descended from the heavens to bring us on stone tablets the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is meant to address the looming and imminent threat that is climate change.
And we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
Which has been dubbed by some as the secular apocalypse. This was sold to us as something that we need to do. Because, according to Ocasio-Cortez herself, noted climate scientist, the world is actually going to end in 12 years.
And we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
Now, there are so many ridiculous and absurd components to this Green New Deal. If I were to get into all of them, this video would be an hour long. A quick example of the absurdity would be the frequently asked questions portion on Ocasio-Cortez's website, which said that the Green New Deal was going to provide economic support to those who are unable and unwilling to work. And if that wasn't absurd enough, when people pointed that out and began laughing at her for it, and actually Tucker Carlson questioned one of her aides on Fox News, he ended up saying that that was a fake portion of the bill and had nothing to do with Ocasio-Cortez at all, even though it was on her website. You can still check archive links of the page and see it on the website. And Ocasio-Cortez herself actually retweeted this interview with a caption that said that Tucker Carlson's right-wing bubble just got burst by the truth, even though the guy who was on the show was 100% wrong. That was on her website, on her FAQ. So when that didn't work and that was pointed out, Ocasio-Cortez said, no, you don't understand. That was just a draft that got published by mistake. Even though it was published the same day that she announced the Green New Deal, and this was obviously coordinated, and the outlets that she announced the Green New Deal on were all linking back to this webpage. Also, we looked at the metadata and we found out that this was put together by a member of her staff. And if this was truly a first draft, you would have expected by now to see, a second draft or another draft, but nothing's been published because Ocasio-Cortez's team figured, yeah, it's best to not publish anything because we're getting destroyed over this thing. While that and provisions about cow farts superficially might be the most funny thing about the bill, there's also a lot of really, really odd contradictions in there that show that Ocasio-Cortez's intent is less about saving the planet and more about forcing down her agenda on the American people against their will.
If you're trying, you've got all the power, you're driving the agenda, you're doing all this stuff. Like, I just introduced Green New Deal 2 weeks ago, and it's creating all of this conversation. Why? Because no one else has even tried. So people are like, oh, it's unrealistic, oh, it's vague, oh, it doesn't address this little minute thing. And I'm like, you try. You do it.
Right.
Because you're not. So until you do it, I'm the boss. How about that?
You heard it here.
For example, this proposal is being sold to us as a way to fight climate change, under the premise that if we don't do this, if we don't change our energy system, the world is going to end in 12 years.
And we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
Now, if you're pushing this as an end-of-the-world scenario, like we have to do this, otherwise the world is going to end, as Ocasio-Cortez is, that would be one thing. But this is also being pushed as a way to fix disproportionate outcomes amongst racial groups in the United States of America.
Today is the day that we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America.
In fact, when you read through this proposal, there's no way you can come away with the impression that if we don't fix what is perceived to be racial injustice, then the planet isn't worth saving, which seems completely backwards if we're talking about an end-of-the-world scenario. I mean, let's say a meteor were about to strike Earth, and we had to go pull an Armageddon, send some astronauts to space. I know in Armageddon they sent oil drillers to space, but it's obviously easier to train astronauts to be oil drillers than it would be to train oil drillers. So we have to send some astronauts into space in order to drill a hole in the meteor, blow it up with nuclear weapons, so that way the meteor won't strike Earth and doom the entire planet. Now, call me crazy, call me a radical, but I would think that in an end-of-the-world scenario, I would want, the most qualified people, regardless of their immutable characteristics on that mission, and not worry about, balancing the genders. Do I have enough trans engineers on the project? I would just, want to not die, save the whole planet, because trying to fill a diversity quota in the face of the end of the world, maybe one of those priorities, a little bit higher than the other. I'm just saying, I'm just speculating. You might disagree. You might think, if we don't have a perfect pie chart of the world or America, whatever you want to scale it to on that mission, it's not worth it. We should all die, because honestly, if we're not progressive enough, why are we alive? Just let us go extinct. And if you think I'm wrong, instead of writing down your argument in the comments down below, try writing it down on a piece of paper and then putting it in a shredder. Because I don't care. I'm clearly not wrong about this. Now, if you think Ocasio-Cortez is just pandering, or that social justice really isn't in conflict with any of the other goals set out in the Green New Deal, then clearly you're not paying attention. Another ridiculous provision in the Green New Deal is that we're going to build up high-speed rail, aka train travel, to such an extent that we're going to remove the need for commercial flights. Now, this is ridiculous and absurd for a number of reasons that I'm going to bring up a little later in the video, but the thing I want to focus on right now is another provision that says that we're not going to build anything without getting permission from traditional indigenous people on how their land should be used. So let's say you're going to replace a very popular flight route, New York to LA, with a train system. Now, right now, your ears should already be ringing, because it's 2,700 miles from New York to LA, and the flight takes about 6 hours. The train at peak, which again would require 2,700 miles of track both ways, would go about half as fast as a plane. So already we're down from a 6-hour convenient flight to a 12-hour train ride. However, that's not exactly true. You see, because one of the things that you need for high-speed rail is a really straight track in order to reach those top speeds. And the reason you need that is because if you're going really fast on a train and there's a curve in the track, you're likely to derail. There's a lot of major train derailments that basically happen around this. The train is moving too fast, there's a curve in the track, train flies off the track, people get injured, people die. Not a great situation. Assuming that there are no natural barriers on a straight line from New York to LA, which is a ridiculous assumption to make because you're traveling from all the way on the East Coast to all the way on the West Coast, obviously there's going to be some natural barriers, in the entire continental US. But assuming that there isn't, let's say the ideal route goes through a Native American reservation. Well, according to Ocasio-Cortez, we would have to ask the Native American tribe if it was okay to build there, and if they said no, we would have to reroute around their land. But that's not even the whole truth. We would have to reroute around their historical claims to land that she deems legitimate. So the train ride from New York to LA ideally would be 12 hours. The rosiest estimates are probably going to be 18 hours, more likely over a day, which might sound better than driving. But again, the flight is 6 hours and it doesn't require, destroying the country with train tracks in order to operate it. And that's where I want to get into the cost. You see, California wanted to build high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles, and this project was stupid from the start. The costs immediately ballooned out of control to $77 billion, which was far beyond the initial estimate. Real estimates say that it was going to cost about $100 billion. It wasn't going to be ready for another 20, maybe 30 years. And Governor Newsom actually scrapped the project. It costs way too much, and it's just not going to be ready in time. It's not going to be worth it. Now, that project only called for the laying of 350 miles of train tracks in mostly unpopulated areas. And it still was going to cost about $100 billion. So even though this is not accurate and it's actually more favorable to high-speed rail, I'm going to round up the mileage to 400 miles of train track, and I'm going to keep the cost, the $100 billion, the same, so that way we get to a nice even number of $250 million per mile of train track. Now, I really need to emphasize how made up that $250 million per mile number is, because in New York, we actually do build subways, and the costs range between $450 million a mile to $2.5 billion a mile. So I'm giving the most optimistic, made-up Fantasyland projections in order to make this point. Because even with that made-up number that, again, won't exist in reality, if we just build the 2,700 miles between New York and LA, which again, as I've explained earlier in this video, we won't be able to do due to natural barriers and end-arounds Native American reservations, the cost would be $670 billion for one train line. Remember, she wants to replace all air traffic with trains. Now, I don't want to just talk about how bad trains are. I want to get into how awesome airplanes are. Because airports have relatively small footprints, you don't have to build infrastructure in the sky, they're safer, and they're much cheaper to operate. Just on a staffing level alone, an airplane requires like a fifth of the staff that you would need on these trains. So getting rid of airplanes would have huge negative impacts on our society, and one of the ways I want to emphasize that point is to talk about some of the largest airliners in the United States of America. And those airliners are FedEx, UPS, and DHL. Now, you might not realize that shipping companies actually represent the largest airlines in the United States of America. It was an interesting fact that I found out recently. But when you learn that, you realize that replacing airplanes with trains would have devastating downward effects on the rest of our economy. Amazon's 2-day shipping, completely gone, off the table. And the inability to move goods across the country in the most cost-effective way will essentially amount to a giant tax levied on all Americans for all the products that we buy. There are also towns like Anchorage, Alaska that basically exist and function due to the fact that a lot of our shipping flights stop there to refuel. Now, these shipping flights don't actually need to stop in Anchorage, Alaska to refuel. They do so on their way to Asia, but the jets themselves actually have enough fuel capacity to make the trip. The reason that they do stop in Anchorage, Alaska is to save fuel. Because it turns out if you fill up the tank of an airplane up to a certain point, you actually have to burn extra fuel in order to compensate for the added weight of the fuel. Since fuel is one of the #1 costs for these airliners, they actually save money and help the environment by stopping in Anchorage, Alaska. But if we were to get rid of air travel, towns like Anchorage would be crippled overnight. Not to mention the states that have the super hubs for FedEx, UPS, and all these shipping companies. All those jobs associated with those airports would be gone, and that's not even getting into, the airlines that you and I take if we take a flight. And that's not even to get into the huge impact that this would have on, the state of Hawaii, which is out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There's no way you're going to build a train from Hawaii to the United States. That's ridiculous. Due to a pilot shortage, the salaries for pilots are exploding worldwide. All of the pilots that are expecting that pay increase, never going to happen. Mechanics who fix the planes, they're out of luck, as well as the companies that make the planes, like Boeing. Sorry, sad day for you, Green New Deal. And one of the most annoying things about this is that for most of the country, trains are simply not a good solution to anybody's transportation woes. You would have a much better success with buses because trains can only run on train tracks. Buses can transport large numbers of people, the routes can change as people's living habits change, but the problem with buses is that you can't have a ribbon cutting ceremony in front of a bus stop. And politicians will always be more apt to take your money and put it towards a big dumb thing that won't work, that they can say, I built, than something that will work where they can't really take the credit for it. So yeah, I ended up spending way more time on this portion of the Green New Deal than I actually intended to. It's just that the left is so obsessed with trains, despite the fact that trains aren't a good fit for most of America. I think I needed to call that part out. If you guys want me to do a second video where I discuss why nuclear energy is clearly the solution and solar and wind are not as good as you think, then let me know in the comments down below. But I'm going to end it here. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias, including Twitter. If you want to support me, you can do so via one-time donation on PayPal or monthly through Patreon or Subscribestar. This has been me talking about trains versus planes and the Green New Deal. Till next time.